It is time for the Writer's Block, our weekly look at all things related to sports. And I hate to tell you, folks, but it's all things related to football this week. But it's that time of year. I'm Jenny Carlson here in the studios of the Oklahoman, joined by Cedric Golden in the studios of the Austin American-Statesman. Hello, friend.
What's up, Jay Carr?
Well, here we sit in the middle of September, and, I know there's baseball going on. I know there's NBA about ready to start, but it's all football all the time, and I just can't get away from it. Neither can you. And let's start with this, Cedric, because we have between our two markets what could end up being the football game of the day on Saturday in college football, that being Oklahoma State at Texas, primetime matchup down there in Austin. This game, Cedric, this matchup has become really dominated in recent years by Oklahoma State. They've won the last 5 in Austin. They've won 7 of the last 9. What's at the heart of the run here by the Cowboys to really play well against the Longhorns?
Well, first and foremost, Jen, the mullet, Mike Gundy, is one of the most consistent winners in all of college football. And while the Texas Longhorns are undergoing a massive reshuffling with Mack Brown leaving, and then the Charlie Strong era was a huge failure, Mike Gundy was still winning in Stillwater. So he kept the trains moving. Mason Rudolph and James Washington and Justice Hill came through here, got some bowl wins. Mason Rudolph now taking over for Big Ben in Pittsburgh, along with James Washington on that team. So the mullet has a winning personality, a winning hairstyle, and a winning career. Meanwhile, Texas has had to get it back going under Tom Herman, and they're finally back on the way to where they think they should be. And so what's happened now is we have a collision of teams, one that's remaining consistent in the Big 12, which is Oklahoma State, and the other one, Texas, which is trying to reclaim some past glories. It makes for a real riveting matchup this weekend.
Yeah, for sure. And after Texas's loss to LSU, you got to think that if Texas wants to be anywhere close to the conversation for a college football playoff spot, this is a must-win for Texas. And, I was trying to think about, as you look historically over the last decade at this matchup, is there anything that runs through the series as far as the why? And Cedric, you talked about the consistency of Oklahoma State. I do think we've seen, as Texas has had its swoon years, you haven't sort of seen the difference makers on defense. It used to be you always knew those, even if you weren't anywhere close to Austin, you always knew the 4 or 5 or 6 guys on the Texas defense that were going to change the game. And in recent years, you haven't sort of had those numbers of difference makers. We're starting to see that return. But as that's happened, Oklahoma State has had, as Cedric mentioned, those offenses that have really pushed. And now this week, Cedric, Texas playing without a couple of their safeties. Obviously, this is the first big test for Spencer Sanders, the Oklahoma State quarterback, where you've got a more experienced guy in Sam Ehlinger. Does this game turn on those quarterbacks, or is it something else that's going to decide this game on Saturday night?
Jan, it's the Big 12, and it's all about the quarterbacks. Don't we know it?
Yeah.
If you've got a great quarterback, you can make it happen in this league. Vince Young, Colt McCoy, Mason Rudolph, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray. Those guys move the needle, and defenses have been really tested in this league. What you're seeing a lot of now is they're dropping 8 and rushing 3 because they've just basically decided, why should we rush those extra 2 guys when we know the quarterback's taking a 3-step drop and getting rid of the ball on time? So they don't try to even get sacks hardly anymore. So what Texas is looking for is the next great defensive player. Where's Earl Thomas? Where's Brian Orakpo? Where's Michael Griffin?
Yeah.
Where's Derek Johnson? Those guys are hard to come by. And even when you do get your hands on one, maybe their dominance is not as noticeable because of the sheer terror that these defensive coordinators are under because of these great offenses that are just putting numbers up like a pinball machine. Yeah. So what I look for this weekend, Jen, Spencer Sanders is a good young quarterback. He's young. He's a freshman. They're going to try to get after him. They're going to try to rattle him. They're going to blitz him more than they blitzed Joe Burrow at LSU because they know that this is probably his first time playing in front of 95,000 people. We're going to find out in a hurry if this kid is ready for the primetime occasion that will be Texas and Oklahoma State.
Yeah, and a couple years ago, while there were all those video game numbers, you still had a game down there that was decided 13-10. So the defenses were definitely on display that day. But, I think it's interesting, Cedric, to look a little more broadly, too, as we talk about this conference and, this really being the first weekend of Big 12 matchups. A week ago we were talking about where's the marquee win for this league. Is it maybe up to Iowa State to beat Iowa to get that? Well, Iowa State didn't beat Iowa, and yet we saw K-State go to Mississippi State and get a win. We saw a variety of teams last week that scored some wins that I'm not sure I was expecting. Obviously, Kansas going to Boston College and winning. So there were several out there. Are you more optimistic about this league, or where do things stand right now as we get ready to launch into Big 12 play?
Well, people aren't trying to laugh at the Big 12 anymore. After the Mad Hatter went up to Boston College and hung a 48 spot on BC, people are like, wait a minute, that's Kansas. What's Kansas doing? And just imagine how big it would be if Texas had figured out a way to beat LSU.
Right.
Texas gets in the end zone early in that game. Then the Big 12 is being talked about as probably the second best conference because we all know the ACC is Clemson and a bunch of other guys that don't really move the needle. We know the SEC is still the best conference, and the Big Ten is right there. But the Big 12 has moved up that pecking order. We know the Pac-12 is down. We know the AAC is not great. I think the Big 12, if this continues, Jen, has a claim as the second best conference in college football. And Texas and Oklahoma State, I think, are going to put on a real show. I still think Oklahoma is the class of this conference. And it remains to be seen when Texas and OU play, when Oklahoma and Oklahoma State meet. Right. But I just think it really sets up for a real fun year. And this is a real good jump-off point for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think it does say that there's maybe a little bit more depth of good teams, maybe not great teams. I think, I agree with you, Seth. I think it is sort of the OU, Texas, maybe Oklahoma State, if they can score this win, they sort of take a running start at being one of the top teams. But, I think it does say, hey, maybe there's upsets out there. Maybe a K-State can beat one of the top teams. Maybe, a Kansas can push somebody. Those trap games, maybe they become more abundant than we saw previously. That's sort of what last week said to me, is that there might be more capable teams in the league. And who knows, maybe that does help to boost the Big 12 when it comes time for those college football playoffs, which seem far away, and yet they'll be here before we know it.